In 1918, a firing squad in a Yekaterinburg cellar abruptly ended the 300-year reign of the Romanov dynasty. The executioners lined up Tsar Nicholas II alongside his wife and children and gunned them down. It's easy to picture Imperial Russia as a glittering pageant of velvet and gold. The actual history of this family, however, is steeped in sex, absolute power, and unrelenting brutality. The Romanovs built their empire through 3 centuries of systemic violence. In that cellar, they became the final victims of the system they had spent generations perfecting. It forces a hard look at how the Russian state operates. Why has extreme, systemic violence against citizens been a constant feature of the nation's governance? The answer lies in the Romanov playbook. They didn't passively rule an empire. They actively engineered cruelty, turning terror into an indispensable tool for keeping their grip on the throne. This playbook took shape early on, particularly with Tsar Alexei in the mid-1600s. He and the early Romanovs discovered that absolute control was easier to maintain if they cloaked their violence in religious and moral purity. Alexei was a young monk who would wake at 4 a.m. to pray, sometimes prostrating himself over 1,000 times. He sought to cleanse Muscovites of their vices, passing incredibly strict bans on drinking, smoking, playing mandolins, and even dwarf dancing. Enforcing these petty bans required grotesque physical force. In one recorded instance, a local city chief was cudgeled until his brains splattered over his face before a monk eventually stepped in to chop off his head. This map shows early Russian territory pushing outward, weaponizing violent righteousness for imperial expansion. Cossack officer Bogdan Khmelnytsky conquered modern-day Ukraine by unleashing massive slaughter. Up to 100,000 Jews and Catholics were murdered in gleefully ingenious atrocities, clearing the way for the Tsar. By framing this state-sponsored terror as a divine moral cleansing, the early autocrats made their authority unquestionable. Anyone who opposed them became an enemy of God, ready to be eradicated. Decades later, under Peter the Great, the rationale for terror shifted. State violence morphed from a religious crusade into a calculated tool for rapid modernization. Peter wanted to force European rationalism onto his empire by sheer willpower. He micromanaged the creation of his new capital, St. Petersburg, dictating everything from public building designs to the exact layout of the road grids. He even produced rulebooks on civilized behavior to force cultural refinement. Anyone caught spitting in public or talking with their mouth full was liable to receive a harsh beating from the Tsarist cane. But Peter's enlightened rationalism was a facade. When his own son opposed his policies, the Tsar had him tortured to death. He waged psychological warfare to maintain compliance, hanging 200 rebels and leaving their corpses to rot in the freezing air all winter long. After Peter, his second wife Catherine took the throne. Her reign was characterized by extreme indulgence, finishing off men with her sexual appetite and treating the state apparatus as an extension of her erratic personal dominance. The civilized era of the Romanovs exposed a dark reality. Cultural refinement and European ideas were merely superficial masks, draped over a deeply entrenched system of arbitrary terror. By the late dynasty, this culture of death had expanded to an industrial scale. Nowhere was this clearer than at the Battle of Borodino during the Napoleonic Wars. Packed with men and animals fighting bayonet to bayonet amidst the cannonades of 1,000 guns, Borodino became the bloodiest single day of warfare before World War I. The flamboyant uniforms of the era turned the field into the most gorgeously dressed abattoir in history. Back in the hyper-crowded streets of turn-of-the-century St. Petersburg, the elite sensed their rotting empire was nearing its end. Playboys and aesthetes reacted to this doom with a carnival of morbid hedonism, seeking salvation in opium, Satanism, and extreme indulgence. When a political system relies entirely on sheer force to keep its population in line, it inevitably fractures the society from the inside out, hurtling the entire nation toward its own violent destruction. Which brings us back to that cellar in 1918. The Romanov dynasty fell, and Nicholas II faced the executioners. Decades later, during a brief window of liberalism in the 1990s under Boris Yeltsin, the bodies of the last royal family were finally excavated, and the true story of their end was told openly. The excavation of the family's remains revealed a larger historical reality. The tools of state terror survived the fall of the monarchy. This flowchart illustrates the reality of that transition. The sheer butchery was transferred to the masters of the new Soviet system, who inherited the exact apparatus of cruelty the Romanovs had spent 3 centuries perfecting. The persistence of autocratic power in Russia is the living legacy of these 3 centuries, a period that established state-sponsored cruelty as the nation's most enduring and reliable institution.